introduction here. And of course, we want to acknowledge Rich as our founder and our visionary leader. And many of these great ideas have originated with him, as you've heard. So if we go to the next slide. And I have the honor today of being your facilitator. And so I'd like to just give a little housekeeping announcement here. So this is being recorded, and if you're the CDOIQ Society member, you will be getting a link to the replay, and we ask that you do not share it beyond this circle. This is a trusted group here, and you're privileged to be a member of this, and so we want to preserve that. Peter and I had a conversation about today's session, and he would really like it if you ask questions as we go, as opposed to holding them for the end. So this could be more of a dialogue than it is just a talking head. Yep. So Peter likes that idea, and I do too. That's how I like to present. So if you would, please put your questions in the chat window as we go along, and we'll get those to Peter, and we can and address it. Okay. Next slide. So it's my honor to introduce Peter, a colleague and a friend. And I recall first meeting Peter over 10 years ago in the hallway at CDOIQ on the campus of MIT. And we struck up a conversation. And together we have been part of this organization and watching it grow, helping curate the content and the speakers and the presentations, as well as contributing ourselves. And so it's been just a great journey and my honor to know Peter for as long as I have. He has written many books. And so if you look at the timeline across the bottom, those of you who are data quality minded will notice that one's out of order. I take responsibility for that. I was pulling this together and forgot to make that last move. But you'll find he has written a lot of books. And if you Google him on Amazon, you'll actually see other books that are credited to him that he didn't write. So we have a data quality issue out there in the internet at large. Okay.
With laughing, Carl. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And one last note about Peter, if you come to the symposium this summer and you run into Peter, ask him about what it means to be a horse husband. So, Peter, with that, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Carl. It's good to talk to everybody. I'll need to get the sharing permitted. I guess that's Jan that gets me that. There we go. All righty. So, again, welcome. It's great to interact with data leaders. There we go. I pop in the upper right-hand corner up there. I'm talking to you guys from Montpelier, Virginia, which the only thing that really is relevant about that to you all is that my connection to the internet is a twisted pair copper wire that is 38,000 feet from the base station. So it's a long ways away on that. But the material for this is coming out of one of the books that Carl mentioned, where I took a look at data literacy, and my colleague Todd and I spent a fair amount of time looking at what's going on here, and hopefully this session will be enlightening for you all. But the real theme of it is connecting data decisions to value, because what we're discovering is that we can get smarter about data amongst ourselves, but it's also incumbent on us to make sure that everybody else who's involved in these decisions understands what's going on as well. And so I'll show a couple examples here where people make decisions that they don't think are data decisions that truly are, as far as the way it goes. Again, Carl, thank you for the introduction. Here you can see this is just sort of my splash page, if you will. But the main thing that's different about me from perhaps the typical professor is that instead of sitting in the classroom, you'll notice that the people who teach in this program do not sit in the classroom a lot. It's important that we convey this to everybody else, but I spent 4 years with Nokia, for example, that were just immeasurably educating, and pretty smart group of people there. And I got doged out of the federal government this spring as well.
Hello
just to
and
keep all of
welcome.
That going
My name
on.
is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Chief Digital Officer for Dataversity. We would like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar.
And some of you may know that I have a webinar series that's been running for 15 years, helping people out with these types of things. And that overall, my focus on these is trying to articulate business value. And so my lifetime total, if you will, is up over $1.5 billion around all of that. Those of you that prefer to get your information on this, data literacy is actually out there at audible.com, and you can download it onto your Audible subscription if that's interesting. The first example I'm going to show you here is an example from British Telecom. A guy named Dave Evans allowed me to use this. But I want you to imagine that you're just a person who works at British Telecom. They had about 30,000 employees that were working for them at the time. And they were starting something called Master Data Management, MDM. Now, that's not necessarily something that everybody in the world should know anything about. To explain this to people. So I'm going to show you 45 seconds worth of animation. And again, just interested to see what you guys think of how they portray all of this. So here we go. Cost them 500 British pounds, which you know is not an insubstantial amount of money, but certainly in the grand scheme of IT projects, it's nothing in terms of that. And yet that did more to educate people in British Telecom about the impending project that was coming along than I think I've seen anything else in the way of training materials and other things that come out about this. So the more we can do to help make people understand this, the better it's going to be. And we're going to start our journey down here where most organizations start, which is that you're looking at data as a byproduct of IT. There's detritus and waste, and you're not putting a lot of time and effort into it, and consequently, you're not getting a lot of value out of it either. Now, I'm switching from that, obviously, into the start of a basketball game. So what's going on here? Well, this is Zion Williams, and he's getting ready to show off. This is literally the first couple of minutes of the game, and he's showing off his Zion Williams branded Nike sneakers. And of course, those of you that remember this, it didn't work out so well.
Zion Williamson's Nike sneaker busted open on the court less than a minute into Duke's Wednesday night game, the star forward went down hard. And so did Nike. The company's stock sliding on the news, closing the day down nearly a point, losing an estimated $1 billion in value.
Well, it started off with the fact that he was injured, which was very unfortunate. And of course, from there, Nike immediately realizes they've got a data quality problem, as Carl was picking on me earlier with my timeline piece out there. So they exist around us. Don't worry, they'll be guaranteed employment for everybody as long as they want to work in this industry here. But most people think they just go and grab, draw a circle around the data. This is where I'm going to grab it. And then they realize it's actually broader, because when you pull on this data, you have to figure out where it came from and under what circumstances. And then it goes to realizing that, oh my goodness, now all of a sudden I'm realizing I'm dependent on the data of others in here, or worse still, perhaps something you've heard of called dark data. This is just data that you have that you don't know that you have. Many organizations have saved money by simply reducing buying the same data, because after all, the data vendors aren't going to tell you, hey, you've already bought this once from us. They're going to keep moving on it. Well, what it really takes is everybody to understand that all organizational challenges have some sort of roots in data problems, and they oftentimes will occur, at least perhaps are easiest to conceptualize, as what our colleague Tom Redmond calls hidden data factories. Hidden data factories are where Department A, you want them to do something a little different, but they won't because they've got a procedure. So the first thing you do when you get something from Department A at Department B is to make corrections for that. That's what we call a hidden data factory. And of course, it happens in between and across departments as well. Department C may be trying to get Department B to do something, and there may be an interaction with the customer that we can actually look at. Here are three hidden data factories that we have. And these are really problematic because they exist all throughout our organization. They are all over the place. And these hidden data factories are literally sand in the gears of your operations. It's not what you want to put in there. I'm not sure what that kid's trying to prove there by doing it, but it is a great example of sand in the gears and why it doesn't work as well as it should. Of course, the real part of this is to understand that poor data manifests itself as multifaceted challenges. This means that when you're looking at this, you're going to always see a data quality problem if you're looking at it from a business perspective after it's been filtered through an IT system or through some business processes. And only the people who connect the dots and put all of this together and realize that a single data quality problem can show up in many, many different ways. It also requires all of your knowledge workers to address these problems systematically. So this is another argument for making sure that they are on board. Data problems are often like the princess on the pea. This is the proper way to say it from Hans Christian Andersen's original piece here. And the idea was, of course, there's a pea down here at the bottom, and then up on the top, of course, is the sleepless princess. And that's because if you don't fix data problems when they originally occur, they will continue to lock in imperfections for the life of the application, restrict additional data investment opportunities, and decrease the amount of leverage that you're going to get out of it, because 20 to 40% of IT budgets are devoted to evolving data. That's migrating, that's converting, that's improving. And I would say that a good place to start looking for value in your organization is to start off by going and looking at the totality of your IT budget and saying, what would 20% of that look like if we were able to reprovision that and go somewhere else? Because, of course, if we don't, it'll take longer, cost more, and deliver less. Thank you, Tom DeMarco, for wonderful words there, because he observed, and many others have since, that we tend not to teach college workers anything about data. And yet, what percentage of them work with it? Well, my definition of a knowledge worker is somebody who works with data. So 100% as far as that goes. And it's even worse when you look at what we're doing as, I'm a college professor, what we're doing here. We teach them typically one class on how to build a new database. But the problem with that is that most people don't use, so they don't typically tend to think that was a good skill that they learned how to put together. And that our bosses have all gone through similar programs or know people who've gone through these programs. And when you go through that kind of a situation, you get this sort of narrow-minded thing that says data people are needed when I build a new database. So I may be integrating ERP systems or putting up a new CRM or other types of activities here that will not actually seem relevant at the time. Of course, I believe they're relevant. I'm sure you all do too. This results in a series of bad decisions that keep getting made. An older stat was half the companies out there have run into these kinds of problems. And the reason for it is quite simple. We have business decision makers who are not data knowledgeable and technical decision makers who are not making not data knowledgeable. They're making bad data decisions that result in poor treatment of the data assets and poor quality data, and of course, indirectly, therefore, to poor organizational outcomes. Wrong. I sampled Morgan Freeman there because he says it better than anybody else. This is wrong. And the most, let's say the easiest way to get this is to think that your company has decided that they're going to implement Salesforce. Now, Salesforce is good quality product, good quality software in there. But let's just say that they've decided that they want it to be done by December 31st. Okay, no problem. I'm sure people are working a lot and also taking some time off for the holidays. So maybe there's a better decision that could be made if we go back and say, let's not turn Salesforce on with a bunch of bad data in it, because then Salesforce gets blamed for having bad data. It's not Salesforce's fault. Somebody else who loaded this in there. Let's instead say that this is an inflection point and the data that's outside of the CRM is perhaps even of 100% unknown quality, and then we move it over to the other side, and now we at least have known quality. I would guarantee you will get much better results out of your investment in CRM, in Salesforce, than you will if you simply load it up with forklifted data that goes from one place to the other. As a topic, data has always had confounding characteristics. It's pretty complex. There's a lot of outsiders that don't want to get on an elevator and talk about it with you. And quite frankly, most of them don't have the requisite architecture or engineering backgrounds. And we've already talked about the fact that it's taught inconsistently because the focus is largely on the technology with the business impact not addressed, not understood. And most importantly, think about this from your organization. Everybody who doesn't have a data literacy background in this is going to have to learn how to do data on their own because they have to deal with the data. It's going to be an issue. So they're having to relearn this and come up with some very unusual, creative things that I've seen in my 40 years of working with companies who do this. Here's an example, a metaphor, if you will, for Wally Easton, a fellow playing piano, and he's been told to go off and learn how to play piano. Now, Wally's great. If your goal was comedy, he achieved that quite successfully. But if your goal is efficiency or quality, he may not have done what we want to have done there. And the question is, what are your organizations forcing all of your knowledge workers to invent here, just like Wally invented this, and not instead providing them with a standard path and saying there are good ways of doing this, and there are some ways that will involve more cost and effort in order to do that. Part of the reason around all of this is because data assets are uniquely different from other types of assets. They're the only assets that you have that aren't depletable. They aren't degradable, and they are durable in nature. When you compare them to other assets, data assets win in the sense that they are better able to be used. This is why some people started off by saying data is the new oil. Really bad idea because we don't tend to set oil up for reuse in there. If those of you are gardeners, I would say add an S in front of it. And there's two pieces that are important for this. You don't put something in the ground on Monday and expect to eat it on Friday. And you don't just fling the seeds around to do this as well. You carefully prepare the plot of soil that is going to be your garden. There's a very good ways of thinking about data. But of course, everybody likes to sell the sizzle. And so consequently, it ends up being an asset that gets lumped in with too many other things. As an asset, data deserves its own strategy, and it deserves attention on par with other organizational assets that you may have. So you may be doing school buses and data. Yep, that's probably need to be your data as carefully as you're managing your school buses, if that seems what happens in there. And let's recognize that there's been at least a half a century of neglect in many areas because of the failure of the academic community to address this. And therefore, you are going to need some professional administration in order to go forward with this. You can separate good data from bad data. Let's talk about how much is actually involved in that. And it turns out it's a really interesting little side detour here. Is well-organized data worth more? Yeah, I think the answer is, but let's make it a very concrete example. Imagine me taking my book, giving you guys the book without page numbering, without a table of contents, and other organizing things that we do in books in order to do this. By the way, this example is from woman named Abby Covert, and I've put some links to some of her things up here. But the best thing is that she made a book about this called How to Make Sense of Any Mess. It's how to explain information architecture to a non-technical person. But you can imagine taking the pages and the spine off the back of the book and not having the page numbers and things. It means that the book knowledge is all going to decrease around that. And so, yes, better organized data is largely more valuable. And 80% of the data that you have in your organization is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. So the question then becomes which data to eliminate. And the surprising answer there is that most enterprise data is never analyzed. So best qualified to do this sifting process, well, that would be you all as the data management professionals that we're working here. So let's move our piece up now to the second layer in here. We start out with capabilities at level 1 where data is detritus. And now people say, oh, data is a resource. Maybe I should think about this a little bit differently in terms of all that. So let's see what that would involve. Let's just start out with some country music. Don't worry, I won't give you too much. This is a little snip of music from a group called the Leuven Brothers. They were a country music group. And this is a picture of the Leuven Brothers on stage at the Grand Ole Opry, the pinnacle of a country music star's career. And somebody said to Charlie, the one on the right, "Hey, Charlie, now that you've become successful, you can deduct those nudie suits from your income taxes." Now they're wearing this suit called Nudie. The guy named Nudie produced suits for everybody from these guys to Dolly Parton and back. So I'm not saying a bad word. His name was Nudie in here. But Charlie, remember this guy over here on the right-hand side, the business partner of the team, said, "Of course they're deductible, but you have to deduct them from your taxes." Sorry, before you can deduct them from your taxes, you have to deduct them from your income, which is a very, very astute piece of understanding. There are so many different concepts around literacy. It's 180 or so that are listed here. We're not going to go through them, but I do want to give you a very specific example. We in this country are very fortunate to have data standardization around food labeling. And when we see a food label like this, we can look at it and see that there are 4 servings per container and 250 calories per. So we would eat, if we ate the entire thing, 1,000 calories. Again, this type of data standardization has been very helpful, and people have gotten more literate by using it around here. Well, let's look back at our knowledge workers again. Oops, sorry, I'm going to go back. Hit the wrong one. There we go. 1/3 of knowledge workers' time is spent redoing stuff that already exists, and only 10% of their time is spent creating new things. Half of them would rather do household chores or pay bills than use the content repositories that you have. 74% feel overwhelmed or unhappy when working with data, and at least 1/3 of employees spend at least 1 hour per week procrastinating over data-related tasks. It gets bleaker. Too many organizations simply put good quality data in the hands of their employees and expect them to do this. But they don't understand that, once again, half of people confronted with this will defer to their gut, even though they have the data here. By the way, wonderful research statistics from the dataliteracyproject.org. They did a great job on this. When we go to C-level suites, it goes down to 1/3 that do this, and 2/3, again, devoting their gut to the process. And here we have 14% of people who avoid the task entirely, or 36% that find another way to do it, whatever that would be. I mean, these are challenging statistics. Here's a group of self-reported statistics, which we should take them with largely a grain of salt, but nevertheless, it's still indicative. This is, again, Randy Bean and Tom Davenport, who've done a great job with this survey, doing the same survey of people year after year after year. So here we have in 2023 some numbers. We go a little bit higher to 2024, and you can see the numbers went up. Again, when this happened, I called bull on them because I didn't think they could move that far, and sure enough, they didn't. They actually had a retrenchment that came back out, where you can see here we go, it's down to 37, 35% on whether they've done this. All of these are anecdotal numbers, though, not really relevant for us. Here's the numbers that I want you to pay attention to. Every year he's done this survey, starting in 2018, he asked the question, are your problems with data primarily technology focused, or are they people and process focused? And you can see in 2018 it was 80-20, and the pattern repeats 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 24, 25. Oh my goodness, yes. What are we going to learn? The problems here are 80% people in process problem. And we've got to change our focus from technology focused exclusively, because it's not helping with all of these. 14%, again, more data literacy project stats, have a good understanding of how to use it, and 21% consider themselves as literate. But when we go to business decision makers, 24% feel they can read, write, and argue with data. 33% are able to create measurable value. 27% say their analytics projects produce actionable insights, and 78% I'll pay me under the table to help them make more smarter decisions about data. I just say, let's all take our hands above the table and we'll all learn it together, right? It's a whole lot better. Our definition for data literacy is not a great one. The ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data, it's a very broad challenge. It's not, there's a lot of variability. It's certainly not a binary kind of a an approach on all of these things, but nevertheless, that's what we've got, so we'll use it. That said, we can look now at knowledge workers and think what enormous amounts of savings are available to these folks who spend, remember, 10% of their time creating new information and not much. Now, if we were going to call somebody as data literate, they would be daterate, right? That's probably not really the good way to think about it. Proficiency may be a better word for it, but actually the word acumen comes in where I like to have it. If I had to choose one, I would say let's talk about getting data acumen, because that has a discerning perspective in it. And here's a person who was simply not knowing that they should be more discerning. Tom Brady, maybe a stretch to call him a knowledge worker, but he thought destroying his cell phone would get rid of 10,000 text messages that he didn't want to talk about with somebody. Here's level 3 on this. And just a couple of things that a citizen knowledge worker should know about. And the first one I used to talk about an elevator story, because in the elevator context on this, oftentimes I'll get on an elevator with one of my students and we'll be meeting the boss, and the boss looks over at the student and says, "Hey, how's your project going?" And the student says, "Oh, we moved it from 65% to 72%. And the boss's head explodes, right? We're talking eyes bugging out, face red. We never do anything at this organization less than 100%. And I expect to not hear from you until you told me you've gotten the 100%. Well, obviously just a miscommunication here, but of course I get to be the one to clean it up. And in the process of doing this, we found out that the data scientist, my student, had not really paid attention to the business context in which they were doing this, and that the 65% actually would have left them with $5 million a year in top line revenue that they didn't have for 3 years because they didn't know they were ready to put something like that into production. So I love telling that particular elevator story. It's not exactly the way it happens, but gosh, it did happen this time, and it was sure an interesting one. Also means that your knowledge workers are going to start understanding stewardship and concepts around it, that they're responsible for the data for the overall organization. They are responsible for it on behalf of the organization. And that it's important. We can't keep going forward with our analytics initiatives only 1 in 4 showing value. That's not going to work. You have to stay current because this is a very fast moving industry. I've already mentioned fiduciary responsibilities. And of course, we're all swimming in the same swimming pool when we look at these. Coming up with topics, artifacts, prints, concepts, posters, definitions like this can be so helpful to organizations in terms of understanding literacy. This was an organization that just constantly had trouble with the definitions between and the relationships between account subscribers, charges, and bills. And so they built this particular piece and just gave a copy to everybody and made sure it was accessible. And the number of confusing things around these topics went down measurably in order to do this. We're going to have to get into an aspect of this where we're going to try to figure out whether you're belonging to an organization. Some of you, for example, might be DAMA members, or some of you may be IEEE or ACM. They all have codes of conduct in there. But the employment agreements are also going to be problematic as well. They may have a situation where people are looking to do something, but not really how you'd want to do it. I'll give you an example of that. It sort of introduces the topic of data ethics. If you haven't had a chance to either read Weapons of Math Destruction here by Kathy O'Neill or watch Coded Bias down here on Netflix, it is both of them are astounding books, different ways. One of them, of course, you read, the other you watch, but hey, watch both of them. They're both great. So let's see what happens here. First of all, a quick little bit about ethical behavior. Now, this is nominated by Harry Shearer on here, and it talks about points, which is a switch for a British train track here. Okay, so here we go.
A runaway train is heading towards 5 workers on a railway line. There's no way of warning them, but you're standing near a lever that operates some points. Switch the points, and the train goes down a spur. Trouble is, there's another worker on that bit of track too, but it's 1 fatality instead of 5. Should you do that? Many people think the right thing to do would be to switch the points.
Now, if we were here in a classroom, I'd ask you guys how many of you guys would switch the points, how many would not. There's no wrong answer to this, so don't feel like that you have to respond in terms of that. Let's take the example a little bit further, though, because that's kind of easy. Save one, sacrifice five, sacrifice one, save five.
Sacrifice one to save five, since that produces the best outcome possible. Now imagine the train heading for the workers again. This time it can only be stopped by pushing a very large man off a bridge. His great bulk would stop the train, but he'd die. Should you do that? Most people say no. But why not? Both thought experiments are cases of sacrificing one to save five. What the trolley problem examines is whether moral decisions are simply about outcomes or about the manner in which you achieve them. Some utilitarians argue that the two cases are not importantly different from each other. Both have similar consequences, and consequences are all that really matter. In each case, one person dies and five are saved, the best option in each harrowing situation. But lots of people say they would switch the points, but they wouldn't push the man off the bridge. Are they simply inconsistent, or are they onto something?
I just want you to imagine the ease with which things would be if your organization said, always push the large individual off the bridge. If they did, very clear guidance. Maybe even so that you would say, I don't want to work for you, but it still is going to be a problem. And this problem has never left us because, of course, if you think about it, the electronic vehicles, the self-driving cars that are out there, they have a choice. They can save the people in the car, they can save a pedestrian. We haven't seen too many occurrences of that yet, but, kind of the same decision point that we'll get to as well. As you're working your way through these types of ethical dilemmas, there are some really good tools that can be used to help you right away. And if you're the only one talking about it in your organization, it's another thing to pop up on the wall by you and just say, look, these are just 15 different ways of looking at how data can be problematically biased from a number of different perspectives on this. Again, here's another example. This is, I mentioned, the self-driving car. What I want to draw your attention to here is the screen here on the Tesla that you'll see. You can see there's a car going away from them. There's something in front of this car, depending on whether you're watching this on a phone or a big screen. It's a car that's getting ready to pass a horse and buggy right here. What we're going to watch is the Tesla try to figure out what's in front of it and how it reacts. Here we go. It's a horse and buggy. Now it's a pickup truck. Oh, now it's a person by a pickup truck. Now it's a semi-truck. Okay, semi-truck driving down the road. Notice the other car's pulling away. That's okay, but we're still barreling straight towards the semi-truck. Sideways, pickup truck, semi-truck. Okay, semi-truck. Well, semi-truck coming right towards me. Pedestrian following a semi-truck seems to be what it thinks it has come down to. The problem here, of course, is that the computer scientists who put this software together were not trained to be humble and understand that there might be something they had never seen before, like a horse and a buggy, and that there should be a category in this software for other. I don't know what's in front of me, and if I'm approaching it at a reasonably strong clip of speed here, that's going to be a problem. Now, what's more important than that? When I get other, I should immediately put the car into caution mode so that I don't know exactly what's in front of me. I don't have good certainty about it. And yet the people who put this stuff together didn't do that. Computer scientists in general are trained to believe they can solve every problem instead of that we're humans and we're going to make mistakes around this. There are a couple things that can happen when you look at data as a resource. Again, not recognizing data leadership as an organizational capability, understanding the role that culture plays in this, and that data should be addressed not project by project, but program by program in order to do this. So our final area that we get to is that data is recognized as an asset here in organizations. And it may take years for sometimes the organization to get to this, but nevertheless, as they put more time and effort into it, they will get more value resulting from it. We started off maybe 15 years ago with something called big data, and we saw it had volume, velocity, and variety, and you can read about Doug Laney's famous words that he never said in a textbook. By the way, Doug tells a much better story on this. There's some other V's that occur. In fact, here is the real interesting piece. Some guy named John Marche in 1998 at Silicon Graphics came up with 14 V's of big data. So stop blaming poor Doug for all of that, and just say, there's clearly some tongue-in-cheek here going on. What actually is a data scientist? Well, that would be a business analyst that lives in California. See, they can get paid a whole lot more, was the original thought. Actually, Eric Siegel is the guy that's credited with coming up with the term, says he doesn't really like it because data science by itself is a redundant term. All science involves data. It's like saying somebody is a book librarian. Now, we'll forget about the fact that we're going to have to teach our kids eventually what is a book and what is a library, but we'll get to those. What really happens to these data scientists is that they're encountering data that is less than pristine, it's less than textbook organized, and they're going to have to spend their time munging the data. Well, munging sounds like a good thing or bad thing or exactly what. Unfortunately, it looks to management like alchemy. We're doing something in there that's really good. Now, the problem is, again, you ask data scientists, they will tell you that every single one of them says they spend 80% of their time munging the data and 20% of their time analyzing it. That's not a good ratio, particularly as much money as these people are getting. I'm not saying they're bad people. Remember, we haven't taught them about business. We haven't taught them how to munge data. They don't know that there's a class of people and tools and technology out there that can help do this. All I have to do is make a 20% munging improvement and I can double their overall productivity, because this is an absolutely hidden bottleneck in there. Again, evolving around the fact that most people are just not literate. The skill sets of data science are too generalized to be of use. They've got to have interest in learning the business, and they've got to become more productive on this. And we've been focusing on just one end of the equation, not on the other one. We need to improve their productivity. And what this means is that we've created really expensive data mungers. Basically, the ratio is 1 to 10. If you have 10 data scientists, you can add 1 data munger to that process and make the data scientist much more productive as a result of doing this. But again, they're doing work by going out there and playing piano with little pink balls. It's just sort of weird. Again, the problem with this, a lot of problems, is that the level of abstraction was incorrect. We shouldn't allow people to become a data scientist. We can quantify them by adding a 3rd level qualifier and say you're into cancer or you're into forestry or you're into weather. Then you'll have somebody who's a useful data scientist, because then they'll have enough business grounding to be able to do this, and teach them that there is a professional category of people out there that can help them with their data munging problems in a systematic way of doing it, as opposed to piecemeal, which is how they end up doing it and inventing that process. I mentioned culture before on this, and you can see here, this is an old analog lock, and how you get an old analog lock. Well, it unlocks things. Once again, something we'll have to explain to the kids who won't really know about this, but what it does talk about, when I walk into an organization and I see a vision, I see skills, I see an incentive, I see an action plan, I will likely see frustration. And the reason is because that organization lacks resources. Similarly, I can see vision, incentive, resources, an action plan, and anxiety because they don't have the skills. You can fill in the rest of this matrix yourself here and see what happens, but it's a super useful one put together by Mary Lippert almost 40 years ago. That part of organizational readiness has not changed, as has not the idea that culture is still going to be the thing that we're going to need to work on in getting people to shift their thinking about organizational data. I have a downloadable case study. You can look at that if you're interested and pick it up. So another really interesting aspect of data literacy is that they're running out of training data. So, wow, AI companies are running out of data. AI is running out of internet, publicly available data on the internet. Data guzzling companies, the internet is too small. AI firms will soon exhaust. And yes, we believe that today there's about 15% less data than there was in 2022 when the ChatGPT latest craze popped out forward on this. The reason for that is because people are simply keeping their data out of sight. I'm holding in my hands here a lawsuit directed by the one of the companies that's hoovered up a bunch of my books. And now they're going to pay more than I've ever made in royalties on the books for the theft of my intellectual property in here. There's another aspect that's going on here as well, though, and that is that some creators are simply saying, look, we're not going to do this. So folks out of the University of Chicago have created a set of technologies that you can use to protect your data, and that while you may have a piece of data that looks like something, they can change a couple pixels on it and make it look like something completely different around this, which means that future AI is going to be constrained in this. And there's another aspect that's here as well, and that's that CIOs and the rest of management are looking at the cloud as being a really problematic investment at this point in time. Because remember how it was sold: cloud's going to be free, you can put your stuff out there and everything's going to be wonderful, right? Well, turned out it doesn't work. So the CIOs are clamping down on the number one expense problem for CEOs worldwide is the size of their cloud bill. And the reason for that is quite simple. If you take your data and 4/5 of it is rubbish, right, rot, and you put it all out there, you're making a lot of money for the cloud vendors, but you're not really making money for your organization. You're not delivering value. So once again, the cloud should be looked at as an inflection point of moving things from one place to the other and making sure that they are of known quality and that we are not going to have much focus that's in there. These limitations are going to forever cap the abilities that we can get from our data, and most importantly, our data is our fuel for our AI. So I like to say bad data plus anything awesome will always yield to you bad results. That said, I think everybody's familiar with the garbage in, garbage out. In fact, that's my motor car that I drive, my little Prius that I go around, and everybody can see it says GIGO on the back of it in order to do this, because these are really problematic. However, I was in the Midwest recently and they came back to me and said, you should really call it goodness in and goodness out, not garbage in, garbage out, because that's a little bit rough. So we'll go with the goodness thing here. But you can see that no matter what you have in the center, governance, analytics, technology, any sort of things along these lines, all of these things are still subject to the data quality. And this is always going to be true. If you have bad quality data, you can't expect any of these technologies in the middle to come up with anything that's going to work for you. So the first thing you want to do is stop spending too much money on your cloud bill. Use that money to actually go in and clean your data out. And now you can evaluate the results of what you're doing in an analytical perspective. When we look at data treated as assets, this means that they're not treating the data like oil. Again, oil is fairly boring, but soil, because we need to reuse it. Again, the desired outcomes on this are making sure that you have a professional that go into this, that you create measurable business improvements. I know I said I had $1.5 billion savings at the top of the hour here as we were doing this, but it's still very important to look at it from that perspective. Rolls-Royce did a bit with their engine maintenance and were able also to save billions of dollars because they no longer had to maintain a backlog of parts. The long retail train, if you will, sifted up very, very quickly. They did a great job of measuring those business improvements. In fact, it's so interesting. It's just a little quick side note here, but Rolls-Royce used to sell the engines. You know, there's a jet engine and I'm going to sell that to you, American Airlines. American Airlines would say, great. But they now understand that if they change and say, I'm no longer going to sell you things, but I'm going to sell you hours of powered thrust, they've changed their position in the negotiations from being opposite American Airlines to being on the same side of the table, because American Airlines isn't going to make any money if Rolls-Royce doesn't make any money, and vice versa. And being able to be treated that way was an absolutely amazing turn for their business that they were doing there. Finally, don't try to do anything too fast. It's going to take time. Anything culturally does take time, and we should really be looking in realistic ways of doing this. I like to approach data literacy from a theory of constraints perspective, that tells you what part of the organization is most connected to the other parts and how fixing things in that part of the organization will fix other things, as I showed you in that diagram that splits out, goes a number of different ways here. So again, we started out here starting out with capabilities at level 1. Data is a byproduct. Data is detritus. People don't really have an appreciation for it. Putting more time and value into it, more time and effort, and can produce more value, data comes out as a resource in here. And again, people understand that, kind of like HR, right? Well, even further than that, it becomes the product that you're looking to produce, data becoming an asset and allowing the organization to really make use of the sole asset that it has, that is non-depleting, non-degrading, and durable in nature in terms of that. So that's the stuff with there. Maybe we can have some time for some questions and things. And Carl, I'll go back over to you.
Thank you, Peter. What a great set of slides and the story that you've told. And I'm sure that's from all of your experience with clients and everything. We haven't had any questions come in through the chat window yet. So if anyone would like to ask a question for Peter, feel free to come off camera and ask your question, or put it into the chat window. And while we're waiting for questions, Peter, one of the things that I've thought about while I was listening to your story here, when you engaged with organizations, did you find that you needed that top-down direction, or did bottom-up work, or was it all dependent on the company's culture? What's been your experience on driving this change around getting data to the level of seen as an asset?
So, Carl, I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask for that, because I've been tenured at the university for the past 33 years. I haven't had to look for a job. So I'm perhaps a bit more fearless than others in terms of going about this, which means that if I don't get it, I don't care. That's just one of the nice things about being old that comes to the process here. So when I go in, yes, I'm always looking to find out what's going on. And I'll oftentimes find an executive, somebody in the top C-level suite who really does get this and wants to bring me or somebody like yourself in to help the organization get better about these topics, because one person at the executive level generally will be a very difficult sell doing that. But they can convince others to come in and join into it. That helps out a lot. So I've gone to some organizations, and the executives really aren't interested, and I'll tell them, well, okay, if I'm not going to have your support here, about the best I can do is get one part of your organization doing some stuff better, and that's usually good enough. I mean, again, if you give me $100 and I turn around and give you $150 back at the end of the period, nobody's really going to complain about that, right? That's really what basic value consulting comes down to. So looking at all of these different ways, I've gotten to the point now where if an organization looks like they're going to be difficult or just doesn't want to work in a nice fashion, I just say, that's fine. Good luck. Good. I'm sure somebody can help you out somewhere, but it's not going to be me at this particular junction. But always in organizations, there are some people like yourselves in the back of the room. If I'm lecturing to somebody or having a conversation, my eyes are going around the room and I'm looking for somebody who's, got their arms closed and say, oh, somebody's going to come and talk to us about data. Let's see if they can actually tell us anything about data. Those are the people I want to go talk to immediately after the meeting and say, what's really good. Oh, let me tell a quick story here, Carl, too. I'm sorry. You didn't ask for this, but absolutely. I'm working with a hospital director in a Midwestern hospital. And he says, oh, great. I'm so glad you're here, Peter, on this day. It's a very good day for the organization. I've got a big all-hands meeting. And I go down to the all-hands meeting. There's a couple hundred people laid out in the auditorium. And he comes up and says, now, you guys have done such good work here. I just want to tell you how your good work and our good management here is going to really come together on this. We've done a good deal of data analysis about what you guys are doing, and it seems that knee surgery is the predominant activity that's going on here. So I've gone and gotten a grant, and we're going to have additional training in knee surgery for everybody who's out here. We're going to have a new wing on the hospital. I've got a bunch of new equipment coming in. We're going to become the knee surgery capital of the Upper Midwest. Sounds good. Might be a neighbor, Carl. So, of course, as I mentioned, there's somebody in the back of the room going, oh, and I can see them kind of, doing this. So of course I run up to him and talk to him after the event is over. And I said, so what's really wrong? And they said, well, Peter, a hospital director thinks he's managing with data, but he doesn't realize that the default hospital admission code is knee surgery. And we optimize speed of getting people in here because we're in the emergency room race and trying to get everybody to come in around that. So we're not really doing any amount of knee surgery here the way he thinks about it. It's just that his data shows that he is, and he, of course, didn't make the assumption that he ought to double check his data before he did this. So again, I think it kind of illustrates what you're talking about. Sometimes there's a real good intent in order to do it, but what it really requires is a coalition of the willing. And if I can make one more quick plug, those of you that aren't DAMA members yet, DAMA is the largest professional data management organization out there in the world, and we've started a new affinity group on data leadership. And so we'll be working with that as well, hopefully working closely with the society here and looking at some joint events coming up, perhaps.
Yeah, Peter, I liked your hospital story. I have a similar one, and it is
Cool.
looking at the customer support and their systems. You actually have to understand the context, and there's structured and unstructured data, and we had the same phenomena. People are incented to get off the phone quickly, so they pick the first thing on the pick list, and over time, the rot of the pick list became it was 200 entries long, and so it was no longer useful. And where we found the useful information was applying natural language processing to the comments, which was the summary of the case and the summary of the solution. So absolutely agree with that. And so we've got a couple of questions that have come in. And so, you've really laid out the need for data literacy, and you've given us some good frameworks. From a call to action perspective, what are the 3 things that we should all go do next now that we've been to this session today, and something maybe we should think about or rethink about in our data strategies and how we're working with our own organizations?
I would say 3 things. First of all, start having more data conversations around, or when you're talking about things and a data topic comes up, take note of who is corresponding with you about that level. Start to build your network inside the organization and outside the organization, finding out who can be helpful, who can have those conversations with them. Don't wait till you're Nike in the middle of a massive data quality problem and nobody really has gotten any good results out of it because everybody's in a panic. So that'd be the first thing that would be there. Second of all, there are parts of your organization that are already doing this well, particularly in larger organizations. I'll find that, again, just to give you a similar size thing, I did 3 years with Walmart, almost 20 years ago, goodness. And they had about 30 people in their networking group at the time, and 3 of those people maintained their data dictionary and the allowable access lists that were there. So they looked and they said, hey, we've got 30 people here that run just the network for Walmart, keeping track of all of these things here. And then I pointed out to them that they had exactly 1 person trying to do metadata for the entire organization, and that didn't work out quite so well. Seemed like the wrong numbers when you compared them to just the networking group having 30 people, and we're going to take an organization as large as Walmart and get 1 person who's going to manage all the metadata. Again, nice way of illustrating that. So that'd be the second thing is to try to connect up with those things and find out what the organizational appetite is on there. Third thing is start to formalize this stuff. Just sort of put together, sometimes you need an excuse. Well, maybe the excuse is it's Halloween horror stories, and do data quality horror stories around Halloween or whatever thing is coming up. And you'll find people come out of the woodwork, but use those sessions. They're all looking for people because everybody understands in the business that if everybody understood data better, things would be easier. Notice I'm not promising nirvana, but easier. So again, find individuals, start to connect with them, and then make that regularized is probably the best way to have those conversations started and get people thinking about maybe we should put in place a formal executive literacy program here because it might help. Oh, I would add one more thing, a 4th thing, if I may. When you have 2 candidates and go after that literacy, make that a priority for HR because they can actually test for some things like that. Great question. Anyway, thanks for it. It was a really good one.
Okay, we have a couple of data quality related questions. First one, in your opinion, what is your opinion on utilizing Gen AI or AI agents for data cleansing?
I would say that if I was hiring you and you weren't using those techniques, I would fire you. It is so powerful in terms of what's going on out there, and things are moving so fast that it is incumbent on everybody who's in the space to become smarter about it. Just to give you an idea of how seriously some organizations are taking this, and I won't say that VCU, my home university here, is super, super serious about it, but they bought for every student, every faculty member, well over 50,000 people, they bought the professional version of either Gemini or ChatGPT, and have organized seriously around there in order to do it. The challenge here, of course, is that they're focusing on AI for AI's sake, not AI as a thing that is 100% dependent on the quality of your data. So again, that's where we get to come back in and ask those little details and say, well, how are you going to do this if you haven't got any good quality data that's going to go in and feed your AI, right? Anyway, great question. Thanks.
All right. This one's a little bit longer, so I'm just going to read it. In encoded bias, data is described as reflecting our history, including discrimination. When historical data is structurally biased, how do you think about fixing data quality through cleaning, changes to business rules, or something else? And who do you see as the right stakeholders to own those decisions?
That's a really good question. I'm going to get you to repeat the second half of it because I wasn't paying attention to the governance parts. I want to make sure I hit the historical part. So
Sure.
one of the things that people don't get about data quality is that there are both structure-related data quality problems and there are practice-related problems, and they all operate continuously. A practice-related problem is the one I gave earlier, where the hospital admission staff was told to optimize getting patients in for treatment. Seems reasonable, right? So they'd hit the default hospital admission code as they were checking people in. And that's why it looked to the hospital director like there were lots and lots of knee surgeries that were going on. That's an example of structured data, of practice-related data quality problems. Structure-related is exactly what you're describing. And I'll give you one that I'm just a little bit familiar with. If you do any work with the census department, and they've got some real interesting data, I've got a couple of friends that are pretty thick into that. You know that there's something about a 1950s gap because the census only releases chunks of data on a periodic basis. So if you're trying to find somebody that was born after like 1950 or something, there's just a big gap and you're going to have to wait a little longer until the Census Bureau is able to catch up and process that. Similarly, though, if you're looking for data around enslaved individuals, you might find a census record that says Peter, as a person, owned a person named Bob, right? And you don't have any last name for Bob. So it would be Peter Bob who belonged to Peter at the time. And that's not an easy way to do it. And the data is going to show you those kinds of pieces in there. This is why our focus on data science needs to be more nuanced and really focus in. There is, I'm talking to you all from Virginia. There is, to my knowledge, exactly one really, really excellent individual who understands Virginia employment data, Virginia voting data. And when we talk on a periodic basis, he has just an immense amount of knowledge around about these. That's where you have to get somebody like that involved because there are these hidden biases that are in there, and you've got to make sure that you address them properly. I'm certainly not an expert in those areas and would be able to refer you to people who are much smarter about those sort of processes than me. But the point I think that you're making is that, yes, if you don't get that piece of it right, all the technology in the world is not going to do any good if you can't find who Bob belonged to after he belonged to Peter, right? God, what a horrible topic. Sorry, I didn't mean to go down there. My brother just got a grant for doing some of that work. So that's one of the reasons it's top of mind at the moment.
Okay, and I have another question. And I'll summarize this one a little bit. Right now with AI, we've got the fear of missing out. We heard that loud and clear at last summer's symposium, FOMO. You know, speed to market is everything, and data accuracy doesn't seem to be as important. And the second part of the question is about good quality training data. You know, you had a slide or two that talked about how we're running out of data, and so there's more of a reliance on artificial data, synthetic data, if you will. And So with all of this going on, is the role of data governance, data quality, and data literacy, is it going to fade away as being important? Because we see people are just trudging ahead with the AI projects, and it seems that there isn't as much an emphasis put on data quality these days. What are your thoughts?
I think that's a very short-sighted perspective to take, looking at that. And I agree with you. There is always a tendency to get something good enough, minimal viable product, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm trying to put up a study here that I think a lot of people have heard quoted but haven't actually bothered to read or gotten a copy of. So this is the state of
Yes.
Yep, the famous MIT study that's been out there, and there have been a lot of people that have said they read this or read the newspaper articles that report on it. It's not exactly advertised correctly. This was a study they did at MIT where they were looking at the impact of Gen AI, and the findings that are quoted widely are that 95% of them don't work. But they also came along and found out that there were some things that would make it work, and the basics of those are pretty straightforward. Focus on back office instead of front office types of activities. Make sure your data is of pristine quality. Make sure that you've got the bias and ethics issues covered in order to do this, and make sure what you're trying to do is improve an existing workflow. Don't try and invent new workflows at this point, because we don't have enough good information on how to get value out of it. If you're now going to let the mantra, 95% of all these AI projects are failing, management's going to shut down that stuff pretty quick, and that's something we do have to watch out for.
All right. Well, thank you, Peter. There are no more questions. So if you have any closing remarks, go ahead, or we can just adjourn for the day.
Well, just thank you guys for paying attention. It's always a pleasure to talk to this. Rich has always got great groups of people to work with, and the society is moving at, I think, great speed around this. And I can't wait to see everybody next year at the symposium.
Thank you, Peter. Peter, can you stay for a minute and one round of
Okay.
applause, Peter?